Devastated pig farmers in Khayelitsha say government has failed them. Agriculture MEC Ivan Meyer on Thursday announced a ban on the sale of pigs following the outbreak of African swine fever in the Western Cape. The outbreak was identified on two small farms in Mfuleni and Rivier. We've got farmers say that while they acknowledge the outbreak, what do they do now with pigs that survived? So for more on this discussion, we're joined by Johan Khayelitsha, who's the Chief Executive Officer of the South African Pork Producers Organization. Johan, thanks a lot for joining us this evening. I mean, we've heard reports of African swine fever outbreaks in Gauteng, Eastern Cape, Free State, and now the first time in the Western Cape. But if it's the first time being acquainted with this term, what is it exactly?
Yeah, I think the bad news is if you say it's the first time, it means it broke in the Western Cape. So their kind of health status where they could claim it to be disease-free of African swine fever is gone now. And as an export kind of destiny for many countries all over the world, I think the Western Cape government, for them it is a great concern. So I met with them on Monday, and I think one of the greatest issues we discussed was the fact that they lost their status. And the idea is to make sure that they manage it in such a way that they regain that kind of status.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about regaining the status, but before we go into the how, let's go into the what. What are we dealing with here when we're talking about African swine fever?
Yeah, the first thing, African swine fever is about pigs, not about people yet. So it's all about protecting your health status for the pig herd itself. So I think the bad news about what happened here is, although it is small and only two farms, the little region where they are, so when you have say a kilometer radius, we talk about 5,000 pigs. So although it's small and the spreading thereof is quite slow, it might be devastating for the small-scale farm. So for the industry itself, I think we need to understand the little economy that happens around pig farming, especially in a peripheral area where like this, a little area around the airport. I think when you lose out on that herd, you lose on animal protein for a specific little community where they eat and slaughter their pigs.
Johan, is this indicative of a rapid spread? I mean, you're speaking here about the smaller farms that have been affected, but we do understand that it's affected also certain other provinces, about 3 or 4 other provinces. So are these just isolated incidents, in your opinion, or could we be facing an African swine fever epidemic of some sort?
I won't say it's an epidemic. I think what we do see is because of the movement of pigs, pork and people, so where you have an infected kind of area and people move pigs and pork out of it, we spread the disease ourselves. So it's not at the same rate and the same kind of intensity as what we've seen in China. And I think the reason for that is the way we are structured in our production systems in South Africa. However, the frequency of the outbreaks is worrisome. So if we talk about frequency, we talk about 9 provinces now. So all the provinces had a occurrence of African swine fever, and it started to appear more rapidly. And I think that's worrisome.
Yeah. Could this actually have a significant impact on the consumer's pocket? Now, with the pigs, for example, that have to be culled because you can no longer use the meat, does that then mean that it becomes more expensive to sell pork?
The answer would be no. And if I say no, I think the reason for that is if you talk about the commercial sector supply into the retail space, and that's normally what you're talking about, where we go and buy pork at a retail store. The difficulty with what we're dealing with here is the poorest of poor people. So they are normally the people buying fresh pork from small-scale farmers, and they sell it into their little community. So for them, it's devastating. If you talk about the greater concern that we have now, I think we do about 85 to 90% of our total pork production is from commercial farmers who are, well, I won't say, you can never say you're African swine fever free. There's no chance that you can mitigate your risk to such an extent it's 100% safe. But we do have a fantastic system in South Africa, which we call compartmentalization amongst the commercial farmers, which ensure to us a greater kind of control or management of biosecurity, of African swine fever through biosecurity.
Yeah. And before we let you go very quickly, you say that government has failed farmers. How so?
No, I won't say they have failed farmers. I think it's a very, what do you call it? it's a complex situation to manage, not something where you can just go in and manage. So my take is, especially the Western Cape government did a lot of good work now in this outbreak, but it's so complex. You can't just go in and cull out and maybe maintain the situation. It is a difficult environment where we deal. I'm talking about the physical environment. It's also difficult with the environment with the people. We deal with 150 farmers, 12,000 pigs, and a 1 square kilometer. So the take is it's not an easy way to manage it. If you talk about a commercial farm, it's one farmer, 10,000, 20,000 pigs. You can enclose the environment and you can deal with it. This is much more sensitive. I think the most sensitive we have in the Western Cape is the environmental issue, because the water table is 1.5 meters deep. So how do you deal with a matter like this, where you have carcasses or where you have, say, dead pigs? Difficult to manage.
Johan Kotze, we'll leave it there for this evening. Thanks a lot for joining us, shedding some light in terms of the sentiment when it comes to the effects of the African swine fever. Chief Executive Officer of the South African Pork Producers Organisation with us this evening.